Hello guys, hi everyone. This is Garang World. I greet you all worldwide, my fans, my followers, influencers, and family, friends. I trust you guys are great, doing fantastic. Yeah, we are here to interact, to discuss, to share some thoughts with you guys. But before we proceed, I just want you guys to listen to this beautiful song by a worship minister, a worship musician. From Nigeria. Her name is Snash, and the title of the song is Waymaker. Good worker, keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, in every heart. I worship you, I worship you. It's a very wonderful song, guys. It's a touchy song. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, bending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You mend the broken heart, you answer to widow, Jesus. You wipe away all tears, you mend the broken heart, you're the answer to widow, Jesus. Miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Alright, thank you guys. Promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Okay guys, thank you. That was beautiful song. I'm here guys to share with you again the series of making the world a better place. This is chapter 5 and it's about already church ministry business plan. We already discussed part 1, part 2 and part 3. This is I think part 4, and it's the last part. It discusses financial strategy in church ministry business plan. And the reason is because I believe as church ministries, in order to preach the gospel effectively, change people's life, positively. Churches and non-profits organizations in general must incorporate business principles and strategies in order to operate and manage their organization effectively and achieve their goals and objectives. So we discuss church vision, missions, goals, and objectives already. In general, not specific to any particular church, but in general, wherever the church is located around the world, whether in America, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, anywhere in the world, church, in order to thrive, to compete, because even churches nowadays are competing, against one another. And it's very important. I think it's God's will as well. Competition, healthy competition, not in a negative way, positive competition, in order to preach the gospel as quickly as it can and as efficiently and effectively. Okay, so, and we discuss about church marketing strategy and how it's important for the church to market its service in order to be received by a wider audience, by the larger audience, and to attract as many people as it can. Just as businesses do some marketing, churches ought to do some marketing as well. And I'm sure many churches, global and mega churches, are doing that. And it is just small churches who do not have resources, do not have capabilities, skills, who are not engaged in that aspect. But as you come across this message, you will learn how to mobilize resources, how to utilize your resources and obtain the resources and deploy your resources in order to do some marketing strategy. And we also discuss about operating strategy, how the church can commence its operation from a start until it's, and forever. There are some activities, some processes, that the church engages in order to maintain its operation throughout a long time. And this is the final part, which is financial strategy. This is very important and it's crucial as well. So let's dive in. And so the church ministry financial plan, our financial strategy, discussed and explained the details of financial transactions and management in the church ministry. We all know that money, finance are a very important element of every successful business organization, including churches as well. They are very important in order to manage and operate the church effectively and efficiently. Okay. From that, let me quote a statement from an author. It says, "Money printed your Bible. Money built your churches. And money sends you missionaries, that is, preachers. And money pays your ministers and preachers. And you will not have many of preachers if you do not have money. Okay, so this quote is from Russell Cornwell. It was quoted by David Schwartz. All right, David Schwartz is an author and the writer of The Magic of Thinking Big. It's a book. I have read that. It's full of ideas. It's full of, great things. So if you wanted to read it, go ahead and read it. So he was quoting that just to remind people that money is very essential, even in church as well. Because, without money, you cannot print Bible. Without money, you cannot build church. Without money, you cannot pay your staff, your ministers, your pastors, your employees. And you will not send them around the world to go and evangelize. It all takes money. And that's how important finance and money is. So how can the money get finance and money? You understand? How does the money get funding to obtain its goals and objectives? As we already said many times over and over that church is a non-profit organization and a social enterprise. It does not generate profit, but it is being established to serve the community, to preach the gospel, to change people's lives in a positive way. So, that is the purpose of the church. Church is a moral institution that has been established to teach people how to live a good life through the gospel. So yes, that is the purpose and the objective of the church organization. It's operates just like schools, hospital, and any other non-government organization, NGO around the world. They depend on government for funding, for donation, for grants. They depend on public, people who are generous. Basically, philanthropists. There are some people who actually, are generous. They are there to help the church through their donation. Wealthy people, even those who not so wealthy, because they have a good heart. They can donate to the church in order to continue with its activities and operation. And also the church members, the church members, they are the primary source of funding and finance for the church. Okay, there's other many sources of funding that the church can generate funding from as well, including obtaining loans from the bank and financial institution to finance their operation. But that is depending on many factors and is complex. And but for the time being, we just mentioned, that church funding comes from government grants and donation, from church members, from business. Sometimes, some business give their donation to churches in order to fund their operation, and from church members, so these are, and those wealthy individuals, those who are compassionate and generous members of the public. However, every church ministry is unique and different in terms of a scale, you know, a scale that is, size as well. Some are big, some are small, some are local, some are global. And in terms of context, some churches, are being established to serve some particular communities. You understand? Some particular geographical location. We have a lot of churches, that are built to serve particular purpose, but they all come under the preaching of the gospel. In terms of location as well, the church that is operating in Asia is different than the church operating in America, than the church that is operating in Africa, than the church that is operating in Australia and in Europe. So they're all different. Resources, they're also different in terms of resources, because some churches, they have more resources. Other churches, they don't have much resources. And the vision, some have a larger vision. They wanted to be global. They wanted to expand. They wanted to reach as many, people around the world as much. But while some, they can be focusing on their country and their city, and not bothering about reaching other people around the world. And then objectives and strategies. All these things, make the church different, and it can be reflected in how, they are funded and how they are financed. So like I said, some churches are small, some are global, some are local, some are large, so all that's how different they are. So it will be unwise to conclude that all churches, use the same strategy and method of finance when they are coming to operate or when they come to be established. Like I said, some churches can obtain loans from financial institution or from the bank. But of course, as you all know, when you come to apply for a loan in the bank or a financial institution, you are required, to provide security in order to guarantee that loan, that you're going to pay that loan, And sometimes, and not only a security, there are some criteria that the bank asks people. So when the church wanted to apply for finance, sometimes it may not meet those criteria and those requirements, and it can be difficult. So, and that's why a lot of churches are very happy to obtain grant from government, funding from the public, donations from the public, and contribution from church members or businesses that are happy with what the church is doing. So church finance and church funding, like I said, will basically come from church members. In the business context, the finance and the funding is required to pay for capital expenditure. Basically, in order to purchase business assets that are necessary to help in operating the business. This include property like land, building, plant, machinery, equipment, and operating expenses. Again, it depends on how large or small the church ministry is, because the larger the church, the more funding and finance it needs for the capital expenditure. Therefore, understanding the amount of finance needed for the church ministry capital expenditure is very important, and sometimes can be complex. However, it is very rewarding exercise that requires a marketing research. Basically, when you come to establish a business or establish a church ministry, you will not know about what it takes unless you are a business person. But you need to do some market research, and in order to do market research, you needed to know, the cost of what you are going to establish, the cost of the business assets, the expenses that are going to involved, and etc. So that's basically. And why it is very important to do that is because you needed to know how much you need in order for your business, how much money you need for your business establishment, operation, and management. And in order to know that, you need the prices or the cost of the items of everything that is involved. The assets, the paperwork, all these things. So you need to do some market research, to go into business websites that are already being operated, and to be able to understand how, they were established, and the prices of important business assets, including land, property, plants, equipment, etc. So, before the church commences its operation or establishment, it must assess and understand the costs and the estimates of assets, essential assets, and expenses, and that is require formulating a budget to know how much exactly do you need. So the church ministry cost structure, most ministry expenses will include establishment costs such as acquiring assets such as building, equipment, furniture, motor vehicles, and in addition to registration costs and the legal fees as well. The church ministry also will incur management, operations, and maintenance costs throughout its lifetime. Basically, the church will require building, that is where it's going to operate mainly, whether that is going to be acquired or being leased, depending of how much money it needs. And that's why it is very important, how much budget you're going to need, depending on how the sources of finance. So if you're going to buy, of course, you're going to need more financial capital. If you're going to lease, you're going to require less finance and less funding. For example, renting, council rates, cleaning and maintenance expenses. Other costs and expenses include management, administration, telecommunications, advertising, transportation costs. All these operating expenses that the church will need. You need to pay your staff. You need rent, to pay rent basically if you're going to be leasing. If you're going to buy a property, you're going to pay some council rates. You're going to pay some cleaning and maintenance costs. And if you're going to employ some employees, of course, you're going to pay them. And if you have to have some internet, telephones, all these things. And advertising, which is marketing, basically all these are expenses that the church are going to incur. And transportation costs. These are the costs that if you're going to have some motor vehicles, we said last time, the church is not a person, it's an organization, and is an organization that is a separate entity. There is a misconception, a misunderstanding of what the church is. I have been trying to explain over and over that the church is not just one person, and it's not a house, but it's an organization. We have many churches around the world. We have Catholic, Baptist, Anglican, and people have to follow precedents. Even those small churches that they're operating, like a Sudanese church, and that's why I said, that's when I was talking about context, there are churches that are being established to serve a particular community, like Korean church. Yes, you have Sudanese church, South Sudanese church. They are not. It's not a one person. It's not a building. It's an organization. Even when the church is very small and is serving a particular community, it must operate. It must understand that there are some things that they must do, follow the rules, and in order to succeed. Okay. So therefore, for this financial plan, let's take the following table as an example, and and of the estimating budget costs of the church ministry, assets which may not be accurate, but to simplify the task, let us assume so. Okay, so church building and premises. We already said, that the church assets include church property, that is, whether it's acquired or leased. So that's the church building or premises. That's where the church is going to conduct its activities, whether it's a Sunday service, whether it's conferences, whether it's a training seminar, training session, like we discussed in church operating strategy. Church building and premises is very essential. This is basically is going to be a very large venue that can accommodate with chairs, with seating arrangement, everything. It just look like an auditorium. Yes, but as I said, it's different. Every church is different. And then furniture. The church is going to require some chairs and seats and others. Equipment, musical instrument and keyboards, drums and guitars, sound system, and etc. Microphones. Yeah, church also is going to require some computers and other digital equipment such as PowerPoint, projectors, video, cameras, and projection. Motor vehicle for transportation and logistic. Yeah, I remember when I used to go to Hillsong, they have some buses that transport people from the city to the church. The church also can organize, can have those vehicles where it can transport equipment and people from one location from one location to another. So, for example, if we wanted to estimate the cost of church building, church furniture, church equipment, computers, motor vehicle, and this is what we call it market research. People have to sit down, church leaders, church leadership, church management, church administration, they must sit down and do some brainstorming, how much all this costs based on the estimate. And basically, you will not get it from nowhere. You have to get into internet and search how much the property costs an average, an average church property, church building costs. And then based on an estimate, you put down the value or the amount. And same thing to furniture, same thing to equipment, same thing for computers, same thing for motor vehicles, and any other church assets. And you come down to the total. For example, church building can be $500,000. This is if you're going to buy and acquire a church building. This is just an estimate. It must not be accurate, but just to simplify and makes it easy for the people. Furniture, it can be $50,000. Equipment, church equipment can be an estimate about $10,000. Computers can be $5,000. Motor vehicles, can be $30,000. And any other assets can be $5,000. So, and the total value come down to $600,000. So this is just church ministry estimate, asset cost and budget. So you need to put down those values and then come down to total, and then come back, discuss the strategies of how you're going to obtain those amount of money. So once the church ministry leadership and management have accomplished the task of formulating an estimate budget for the establishment costs of church ministry asset, the next task is to determine how much funding and finance the church how much funding and finance the church ministry has, and how much the members are planning to establish an organization, have contributed, are willing to contribute. So when you have formulated a budget and come down and arrive into an estimated budget amount or value, okay, now we have this amount of, this is what we needed in order to do what we wanted to do. So now, where are we going to obtain this finance or funding? Are we going to apply for a bank loan, for example? or are we going to contribute ourselves as the church leadership or church management? Maybe 2 of you, 5 of you, 10 of you, maybe 20 of you. You understand? If it is a business organization, it will be absolutely the same thing. If it's a non-profit organization, you want a school project, a hospital project, maybe any other community project, it will be exactly the same thing. Even the government, when it comes to do some maybe development project, it will university project, library project, you understand? Any community project or government project, organization project, it must formulate a budget and arrive into an estimated value, and then think about the strategy of how to obtain those funding. So you could apply for a loan, but if you are not in a capacity of obtaining a loan, then you have to contribute yourself. You understand? Yep. So if the church leadership have accomplished the task of forming the estimated budget, so let's say the church is not in a capacity of obtaining that amount of estimate, $600,000. It may be difficult or very hard to obtain, even with the bank loan, even with the members' contribution, even with the public donation and fundraising. You will not be able to obtain, but you could only obtain a half of that amount, let's say $300,000. So the remaining funding or finance must be raised by getting more members to join in. So you have options always. You wanted to establish the church, and you have estimated about $600,000 in order to establish, operate, and manage the church. If you cannot get that estimated amount, you could reduce that amount into half. Let's say if I can't get $600,000, I can get $300,000, and that will be sufficient. Instead of buying a property, for example, you could lease a property and establish and operate and manage until later stage, until you will be able to obtain the full amount, and then you could actually purchase or acquire the property. This can be done by inviting people to the church venue. If there is no church venue or building it can accommodate, alternative place can be arranged for raising funds. So in order to obtain more funding, like $300,000, like if you can't get the $600,000 and you wanted to get a half of that, the $300,000, maybe in a year time or 2 year time, you wanted to you wanted to achieve your goals of reaching that 600,000, you have always options. You have to invite more members in order to raise that amount of funding, and either you do some fundraising that basically, if the church do not have the venue where people can be invited there, you could hire a hall where you could do some fundraising. This can be either in a house or a large venue that can accommodate a lot of people. To accommodate such event. Alternatively, the church ministry can ask the most generous public members to donate to the church ministry. Another option, like we said, in order to obtain the other half, the $300,000, you have either, to increase your church membership by inviting people into a larger auditorium and obviously tell them about, that you are going to establish a church and this is very important, and, explain your vision and your mission and goals and objective, and convince people that this is something that is going to help the community, including businesses, government officials, and most generous and people who are basically do philanthropy, those who donate to community projects and charity. However, this is a delicate and complicated matter, as raising funds from the general public is difficult, especially in developed world. Like I said, sometimes it's very important to understand that fundraising is not easy, but it's a complex and delicate process that require some procedures and to follow some certain rule. For example, the church ministry leadership and management must be careful about ethical and social and legal responsibility and consideration associated with public donation. Especially those of us who lived in the West, when you come to do some fundraising or donation, there are some ethical, social, and legal responsibility that must be considered. For example, as discussed earlier, churches must determine the legal requirement for church ministry establishment and operation in their jurisdiction, including registration and charity status. Some people or some business do not just donate their funds, or government do not just give grant to people, but they give those grant and donation to churches, non-business organizations that are registered, and that's, as we said in operation strategy, that churches must register, they must have insurance and public liability insurance, and they must have a legitimate bank account, that is to be recognized as legitimate and as legal organization and entity. Otherwise, because no one will give their just money to an organization that is not legitimate and is not registered. In addition to that, there is a charity status. Charity status that gives people the incentive, when they donate their money, because some people, they wanted to claim that as a tax deduction, but if they don't give it to an organization that is recognizable, that is legal, then their money will not be acceptable as a deduction. So this is very helpful when seeking funding and donation from the members of the public and the government. As a society would like to know the legitimacy of the church organization and the purpose of seeking funding and finance. It's very hot here and I'm sweating. I don't know why. It's okay. So that's what I said. You know, if you want funding as a church or a charity organization, you must be a registered organization in any country that you are. And that's what I said, you know, churches, business organization, non-profit organization, they are different. You know, those who operate in Africa, those who operate in Europe, in Asia, in America, in Australia, you know, there are special rules, different rules in different locations. But where I am in Australia, in order to be able to raise funds, to receive donation from a business organization, from government, you must have legitimacy, you must follow legal rules, including registration, having a public liability, having legal or official bank account where the money can donate, because there is accountability, there is a report that happened. You know, you need to be accountable for those finance and to those funding. And for people who donate their money as well, they needed to know and understand that their money is going to a worthy cause. It's not going to be just wasted. So that is very important. If you follow all these rules, it will make it easy for you to obtain funding and finance, even from your members as well. So in the church ministry, leadership and management, founding members can rely on whatever funds they have and readjust their budget according to the amount of funds in their possession and spend within their capacity until further ways of obtaining funding are discussed, approved, and implemented in the future. So, if the church has those $300,000 or is able to raise half of the estimated amount that we have already discussed, that is $600,000, the total amount. If they can be able to raise half of that amount, and that is enough, you know, they can do whatever. They can go on with establishing the church, opening the church, and start operating until, you know, later on in 1 year time, in 2 year time, 3 year time. Other strategies, other ways of raising more funding are discussed and approved and implemented in the future. So this is very applicable for the church ministry. That is not in a capacity of raising or receiving donation, you know, from government, from business organization, and from other notable organizations that would require for the church to follow some certain and legal procedures, including being a registered charity organization with taxable deduction incentive. So if the church does not want to go into complicated and delicate path, it can settle whatever they have or just rely on a church members' contribution without resorting into people that will require the church to follow legal and some ethical procedures. So, as I said, the church can be satisfied with the available funds and try to spend as little as possible to avoid debt or overspending. So this financial strategy is applicable or is suitable for church ministry that that will not in a capacity of acquiring or buying a church building. So they have the 300,000 or the 50% of the total budget of 600,000 is applicable or is suitable for a church that is not in a capacity of acquiring the church building, but it can lease until in the future plans or future strategies of obtaining funding are discussed, approved, and implemented. Especially a small church that does not have enough fund to acquire a church building or is not in a position to raise additional money. So sometimes it's small churches, there is a lot of reporting. There's a lot of administration goes into the church, especially when they wanted to raise funds in more capacity, in larger capacity. So they can just settle for whatever they have without resorting into the public donation or fundraising. So the church can lease a church building that is already exists with or without adequate funding and seating arrangement of the church, but it still can be used to conduct church service. The church can lease or rent a church venue, a church building that is already exists with feeding capacity and seating arrangement to be able to conduct its activities and service. So according to this study, the church ministry establishment cost budget will be relatively small and much lower than the church ministry that is like to acquire or purchase and own a building, like in the following. So a church that is wanted to only lease, a small church that wanted to just lease or rent a church building, a church venue, their budget will be likely would be like this one. An average rent nowadays for a year it can be 15,000. You understand? Yeah. The table that we discussed before, a church that would like to acquire will need 500,000 in order to purchase or to buy a church building. But if the church only has $300,000, it can only lease until it have it can raise more funding or more money in the future to be able to purchase or to buy a building. So the average yearly lease or rent can be 15,000 a year, and then furniture is the same. It doesn't change. That is 15,000. 50,000. Equipment is 10,000. Computers is 5,000. Motor vehicles is the same, it's 30,000. Others is 5,000. So the total can come into 150,000. So, and you have another 150,000 that you could actually put into bank account until you raise additional money to be able to acquire. So the above table shows estimate for establishment costs. However, when the church begin operating, of course, the church will be able to incur some ongoing costs, that is operating costs, that based on monthly. These are called operating costs, which must be planned and budget based on estimate figures that the church organization will spend. So let's see the table below, what type of the expenses that the church will incur. We already stated that the church that would like to lease will incur rent or lease about 15,000 a year, and equivalent to oh my god, I don't know, 1,000 plus 1,250 a month. So this is just an estimate. It could be lower, it could be more. And then the church advertising, we already stated, 5,000. It could be more, it could be 10,000, depending on, how much advertising the church wanted to engage in. And then the church, you have electricity, maybe about 1,000. You have insurance, 1,000. It could be more, it could be less. You have wages, if the church employs staff, you're gonna have some wages and salary. You have other expenses like cleaning, maintenance. If the church is, of course, own a building, you have council rates, etc. So church total expenses can come to around 75,000 or 100,000 a year. It could be less, it could be more. This is just an estimate to make it easy. So when you have an operating ongoing cost or ongoing expenses, there must be an income. We have businesses. Businesses, they generate income. If it's a retail, they have something that they sell. If it's a manufacturing, they have something that they produce and sell to customers, and that's how the business obviously generate an income. If it's a non-profit organization, of course, the government funds, if a school, a hospital, a university, government every year allocated certain amount to those organizations. But where the church generates its income, the church ministry revenue income will mainly come from church members' contribution. So this include offering, like the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, every church, income comes from the offering that the church give on Sunday and other events. We have church organizations that are engaged in other business, like Catholic, they have schools, that's where the income come from. And we have other churches that have established other businesses, and this is where the most churches come from. But mainly church income comes from church contribution and offering on Sunday's service and other important events. So these church leaders, church members, and church stakeholders' financial contribution and partnership. So the church revenue also can come from additional church leaders and members' contribution outside of the normal tithe and offering. During Sunday and other church ministry gathering events, these are church leaders and members who have pledged and committed to contribute financially to fund its church activity. So sometimes outside of church offering, like tithe, and seeds offering and all these things, church revenue can come. There are some church leaders and members who can actually pledge, look, because we are committed into preaching the gospel, and we are committed into helping and donating to church monthly, maybe yearly, a certain amount, in order to help the church pay for its operating expenses that we just mentioned. So these are outside of normal church offering. So the church ministry can also receive revenue from government grants, donation from public, and philanthropy, and from business as well. So the church can organize a fundraising activity or voluntary donation by the public and business organization members to deciding to donate money to the church. So church, if it lacks or run out of funds, it can organize fundraising, by organizing a large events, to invite people, members of public, to, let's say, look, we have this church and we need really funds, and we need you guys to help us. You can invite business leaders, community members, and church members to raise funds. So government grants, donation from members and public and business organizations. Fundraising requires the church to be legally registered and tax-deductible recipients so that people and business organizations can claim tax deductions on their giving and donation. This is what we just explained before. Raising funds and receiving government grants and donation from business organization or from wealthy individual is not easy, but a church must follow some legal procedures and policies, including being a registered charity organization that can give people incentive to receive tax deduction in their donation and giving. Church ministry can engage in public donation and fundraising activity to fund its activity, in addition to members' funding and financial contribution through tithing and offering on Sundays and other church activities like conference, revival, and evangelical outreaches. The church ministry can ask members of the public or prominent members of society and businesses to donate to church ministry to preach the gospel and change people's life in a positive way. Church ministry can raise funding and finance from the members of the public to fund its activity and pay for essential expenses. Okay, let's assume that the church has members of 150 fully committed members, participants, and each decided to give an average of $100 $50. So the church has 150 members, and every member gives 150 every month. So this will be equivalent to 222,500 a month, and equivalent to 270,000 a year. So that is a very large amount. If the church has 150 members, committed members, and pledged each one to give 150 every month, so that an equivalent to 22,500 a month. That's a lot of money. If the church receive 22,500 every month and 270,000 a year with just 150 members, that is a lot of money. That means churches really, if they are serious about their church ministry, then there is no doubt that actually church can succeed and preach the gospel as effective as it can and reach as many members as it can by engaging in marketing and effective operating strategy. Yeah. So this means the remaining fund can be used to conduct and organize major church programs such as conferences, revival, evangelical outreach, or put into church ministry saving account, you understand, in order to acquire church building. So we stated already before that an estimated budget for a church that wanted to acquire a church building is $600,000. But if the church only wanted to rent or lease, it can just use a half of that amount. If it's not in a capacity of raising or obtaining that amount of money of 600,000, it can just use if it can raise 50% or 25% of that, 300,000 or 150,000. It can start operating and establishing until later on is in a capacity to be able to raise the full amount. This is the strategy now. We just give an example. If the church increase its membership, let's say it started by 50, went to 100, went to 150, and each member, even 200, even 250, and only a certain amount of members are in a capacity who are working full-time, for example, and they are pledging to donate or to contribute 150 every month, that is equivalent to 22,500 every month, and 270,000 a year, just as in 1 year. So that is just in 1 year you'll be able to raise the other half of the estimated amount of funding. And if you wanted to acquire your building, that's it. You could put that money into saving account and buy a building. If you wanted to organize a conference, the church can organize a conference, can organize an outreach. It can do a lot of activity with that money. So I'm just curious about how churches those churches that have not been have been stagnant for many years, while there is a financial strategy of achieving their goals and objective. So I'm doing this in order to help the churches. I say, look, this is there is a strategy that you could actually follow and achieve your vision, your goals and objective. Okay. So the following example of church ministry financial statement budget, the church ministry leadership and management must prepare annually to record and report their financial transaction. So a financial strategy is not only about church funding and finance, but it is also about maintaining church financial transaction and statement, because the church must be a steward and accountable to the finance and the funding that it receives, and the funding and the finance and expenses that is expended. So in order to do that, it must keep an accurate record and of financial transaction and accounting transaction that and in order to prepare financial statement every year. That's income and income statement, balance sheet, and equity. So because the church the income statement show the source and the amount of church ministry income and revenue and operating expenses, and the difference is either surplus or deficit. So church income statement or profit and loss in terms of business organization shows the source of finance or of church income and revenue and operating expenses, and then if the revenue are more than the expenses, that is surplus for the church that it can use for other things. If it's the expenses are more than revenue, that is a deficit, and it must do something about it, maybe cut on expenses and etc. So the balance sheet shows the total amount of assets and the church ministry liability. It owns, and the difference is equity. That is, equity that the church can use to do some other activities. All right, I think that's it. That was church ministry business plan and financial strategy. In summary, so church finance is very essential and is very important, and it can be complex task and responsibility that the church must pay attention to. So the reason I'm doing this as a part of Making the World a Better Place series, Church Ministry Business Plan, I have observed and noted that actually many churches do not follow accurate and essential business strategies and principles of operating and managing the church. If they do, they will not have any problem of achieving their goals, operating the church ministry effectively and efficiently, and there will not be any conflict, there will not be any problem, and people will be happy to come and be a part of that church leadership, management, and be a part of that church community anywhere around the world. But sadly and unfortunately, many churches lack the will, the desire, or lack the knowledge or the understanding of this important aspect. So I hope that actually these videos will be able to help many churches around the world and raise an awareness to the public that, guys, if we needed to help the church achieve their goals, they must follow some certain rules and guidelines and principle in order to be able to receive funding and to receive finance, either from the government, from most generous public, or from church members themselves. Yeah, I think that's it, guys. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, I hope you guys are going to be inspired and educated about this last part 4 of Church Ministry Business Plan. Yeah, please follow, share, and comment. Give me a feedback as well. I know I haven't done very well in this last part, but there is a reason for it. Yeah, I'm doing this in a very, very critical situation I am in. Thank you.